Medication, therapy, community, and then true self-care and self-love from a place of self rather than from a place for other people.
Welcome to the Fearless Happiness Podcast, where we showcase phenomenal individuals who have overcome serious traumas, life obstacles, and challenges to find their own path to fearless happiness. Listen as Max Naist invites guests from all around the world to share their experiences and spread strength, hope, and faith. This is the Fearless Happiness Podcast, and this is Max Naist.
All right, everybody, good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, wherever you are in this world. It's Max from the Fearless Happiness Podcast, and today I have an amazing guest joining me, Dr. Kyle Elliott. But what I like to do, Dr. Elliott, is have you introduce yourself to my audience, who you are, what it is you do, and then, like I said, you and I are going to rock and roll.
Yes, thank you, Max, for having me. I'm excited to be here. In a nutshell, I'm a tech career coach. So what that means is I help tech executives find jobs they love. So navigate it from figuring out what they want to do through landing that job. And then once they're in it, succeeding in it. And I'm also a mental health advocate. So I love talking about my own lived experience with mental health to inspire others to get the help they need to achieve recovery.
Right. And I think we need more advocates like yourself, because I know, and you know, for instance, ourselves, like if we're in it, it doesn't feel like there's any hope. You know what I mean? So this is why I appreciate you spending your busy day with me, or spending part of your day with me, and sharing those challenges with my audience, right? Because the whole premise of this podcast is to show my audience that doesn't matter what you go through, you can go through challenges and still be successful, whatever that looks like for you. And in your case, you became a doctor, went to school during the pandemic, everybody. And here we are today. So if you would, Dr. Elliott, please go back and tell us some of those challenges you talked about, especially mental health wise, especially with the state of the world and our country as it is today, and how you navigated that and how you overcame those challenges.
Yeah, I love that you said the word hope too. That's why I speak about my mental health conditions, to give people hope and know that they're not alone. My journey started in high school, but I think the pinnacle of it was, or like the really key point of it was in college. I spent 5 years with migraines that went undiagnosed. I went to dozens, if not hundreds of doctor's appointments for these migraines that would go on for days, that left me bedbound at times. They were excruciating. I missed dozens of days of school each year, and we couldn't figure out what they were. And then finally, sophomore year of college, I was seeing a doctor at my university campus, and she said, "Hey, have you ever seen a psychiatrist to talk about these headaches?" And I said, "No." And I went to the school psychiatrist, and it must have been no more than 2 minutes. And she said, "I think you have anxiety and OCD, obsessive compulsive disorder." And she did more tests and assessments. But as
Right.
soon as we started treating that anxiety, that OCD, I started seeing relief for my mental health conditions. And I don't blame my doctors early on who didn't say anything about my mental health conditions. But looking back, I wish there would have been more awareness and knowledge of mental health. So I wouldn't have went to all these doctor's appointments, been in pain,
Right.
miss school, miss out on life during that time. So that's why I speak up now, to give people hope and know that they're not alone.
Yeah. And you said so you can't. So part of me does blame some of these doctors, and some, of course, right? Because they just want to go see you 5 minutes. Here's a pill, be
Yeah.
on your way. So I could see the next client, and so on and so forth. Right.
Mhm.
But the ones like the first psychiatrist I saw was like yours. Like she really dug and said, let's figure out why you're having these symptoms,
Mhm.
what's going on. And in my case, it was a lot of it was due to my drug use and my addiction. Right. It just, all those years, it finally caught up to me at 5 years sober. And it was like, what's going on, but when you don't understand, see, that gives me some kind of some ammunition with some friends I know, because they go through these migraines really bad.
Mhm.
And so now I can give them some insight, like, hey, why don't you go see your doctor and see if you could see a psychiatrist? It may be because you're have some OCD or some anxiety going on that you don't know about. And that's what, now that you said that, I attribute that to my migraines my first year sober, like all the time, all the
Mhm.
time. And now I realize it was, part of it was anxiety, but I just didn't know how to handle. I didn't know how to put a finger on it, because in my first year, I didn't, I'm getting sober. I have no insurance. So I'm trying to navigate life and stay
Mhm.
sober. And I'm going, oh, what's going on? But now it makes sense. Now it makes sense. So, but in high school, right? And I'm sure, going through high school with that, and like you said, that stuff will put you down for,
Yeah.
you know, um, was there any bullying going on? And I asked you that because when people don't know, that's what it seems like people do. Like,
Oh, yeah.
you know what
It
I mean?
was severe. I was bullied elementary school, middle school, a lot of high school, and there was a lot of anxiety from that. I didn't know I was gay during those times, but I think other people had ideas that I was gay and I was bullied severely. And I think that was where a lot of the anxiety came from, this lack of control. And anxiety often comes from this lack of control. I think that's where the OCD came from. I said, okay, I can't control, or I feel like I can't control myself, or my surroundings at school. So let me see if there's other areas where I can focus on some compulsions,
Right.
that can alleviate some of that anxiety and stress that I had. So it was a lot of it. It was really traumatic, going through school and getting bullied severely, persistently. Um, and I think that's why I ended up getting, or being diagnosed with anxiety and OCD and later panic disorder.
Right. Because you got to think about it, right? When we're young, like you said, elementary, junior high, stuff like that, especially in those formative years where we're trying to figure out who we are, what we are, and and where do we fit in life,
Mhm.
right? And when we're different from mostly everybody else,
Mhm.
right? Your people, when they don't know what they don't know, they some unfortunately it comes out in bullying or whatever. And that had to been tough growing up, right? Because
Oh
I
yeah.
know I got picked on because I was short, right? And then I grew up with short man's attitude as soon as I hit junior high. The bigger you are, and I suffered the consequences. But now I understand from what you're telling me is where OCD can start, right? And anxiety, right? Because you're going through this time in your life where you don't understand it. But if I do this, it helps alleviate my symptoms, and I can block everything out, focus on whatever that is, right? The OCD. Like for me, my wife will tell you my OCD is making our bed, right? Making sure that it's,
Mhm.
from the military, I can bounce a quarter on, a quarter on it. But everybody's got their thing. And so when you're going through being, and I'm always an advocate for the underdog, right? Like even when I was younger, like if I saw people getting picked on, I would step in, even if I got let's say my butt kicked, right? Like, hey man, that's not how you treat people.
Yeah.
How did you navigate that growing up? Because because you said something that struck with me. It was consistent and persistent. Like
Mhm.
us kids, when we're kids, can be brutal. Like I've seen it with my grandkids and their friends. You know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
and thank God that, they have really good parents that teach them what not to do and what to do and how to treat people. But I've seen children, right, at events where like football games where you're like, okay, I don't want to say it, but it's like there's not really good supervision going on here
Oh
because
no, yeah.
you know what I
And
mean?
bullying, it's pervasive and it's really an epidemic, at least in the US. And for me, my outlet was work. I started working when I was really young, at a local diner. I was a busboy and it was an outlet. I could be really good at that. I could be
Right.
really good at school academically. When I was 16, I started working full time at the local Denny's as a server. So I found these spaces where I could be around adults, perform really well. I ended up getting addicted to work. So it was a space
Right.
that I could do really well at. And over time, I've learned to find healthier ways to cope. I do Pilates now. I
Right.
love Disneyland, so we do that. But for a while, it was like, let me just perform. If people aren't going to like me for me and who I am, at least I can perform at work, perform academically, and they can like this output that I have. And I had to unlearn through years and years of therapy to not be liked just for my performance or my output, but instead people can actually just like me for who I am.
Right. And that probably took a lot of work, right? Like, cause
Oh, a
over the
lot.
years, right? Like you said, you're finding if I do this, people will like me this way, right? And if I hang out with an older crowd and really do well, I'll get the praise that that I'm looking for, or the acceptance, right? Because I mean, I know from when I was a young kid, it's so different than it is today, right? Because we didn't have video games, we didn't have cell phones, we didn't have Facebook. It was go play till the lights come on and then be inside, or be in by 5 for dinner, and then you can go back out, and when the lights come on, you better be in the house, right? So, and I'm glad this is a topic we're talking about today, because I'm sure there's people out there even into their adulthood who haven't learned how they can manage those things, right? Like whether it's anxiety, right? Because I want to teach them through you and stuff. Like it doesn't always have to be medication, right?
Mhm.
Because the doctors are so quick
Yep.
to prescribe something, like, for instance, Xanax, right? Which we know is highly addictive,
Mhm.
which I hate to say, but keeps me in work in the business I do, right? In the field of addiction. But I'm really a big advocate of the holistic, and right. Sometimes you do need medication. I'm not saying, because I'm not a doctor, right? Some people do need the medication, right? We know there's certain mental disorders that medication really helps them so they can function in the world. But so as you're growing up and you're learning these, when did you realize, Dr. Elliott, that like, okay, I'm being an actor and I need to find out, as we hear nowadays, how did you find your authentic self, so that you, like in my recovery, it was always taught to me, you're on the right path when you look in the mirror and the guy that's looking at you in the mirror is smiling
Mhm.
back at you. You know what I mean? And that was very profound for me, because that guy did not happen for a long time. So, how did that happen
Yeah.
for you? And because I want the audience to understand like the journey you went through that made you who you are today, and how they can probably pick some stuff, tips, and like say tips and tricks from Dr.
Yeah.
Elliott to manage this stuff.
I think it's three things that have worked for me, and people can treat it like a buffet and say, here's some I might want to do. And then I'm a doctor. My partner, he just got his wisdom teeth removed. And while he was sedated, he kept repeating, here's my partner, Dr. Elliott, but he's not a medical doctor. And he kept repeating that over and over. He also kept highlighting how he's older but looks younger. So I keep making fun of him. But one of them was medication. That was really helpful for me to just start regulating my system. And it took a lot of trial and error. I never tell people, here's a medication I recommend or that you should be
Right.
on medication. But for me, that was helpful. The second was therapy. I've been in therapy for more than a decade. And similar to medication, is finding the right therapist or therapists that work for you.
Right.
With that, I've also done spiritual direction the last few years. I've worked with coaches, mentors. The third of this kind of I would call it not even, I would call it a table. I think there's four here. The third is community. So finding other people, friends, family,
Yeah.
people I can count on who
Right.
can be there. And then the fourth is self-care, and not just brunch or Netflix. Those can be helpful, but things that actually fill you up. So like this year, it's been Pilates. During the pandemic, I went to school for a doctorate in education because I love learning. So finding those things that really fuel you up and fill you from the inside and bring you gratification that aren't just, maybe that's work, but things that aren't just for other people, but really internally drive you and motivate you. And that's what's been helpful for me, those four things: the medication, therapy, community, and then true self-care and self-love from a place of self rather than from a place for other people.
Right. And I think that's important that you mentioned that, all that, right? Because it's not just a one size fits all.
Mhm.
But one thing I say will work for people, anybody, is that part where you said self care, self
Mhm.
compassion, finding what your purpose is, right? What
Mhm.
drives you, what wakes you up in the morning, right? Like,
Mhm.
right, finding that thing like work, right? But they
Mhm.
say if you love what you do, you never work a day in your life. So that could be anything for, right.
Mhm.
But that's how, when I work with clients in addiction, it's the same. I always just say, especially if they're like turned off by the 12 steps, right? Which
Yeah.
my audience knows I'm a 12 stepper, have been. This Friday, I will celebrate 21 years clean and sober.
Congrats.
Right. Thank you. But I always say to the ones that even don't want to do that, it's still a mind, body, spirit thing, right?
Hmm.
You got to put good things in your mind, um, right? And if that means taking medication that's going to help you regulate, like you said, regulate your system and right body, what are you putting in your body? Like, are you eating clean or a healthy diet? Are you exercising? And then spirit, right? Whatever that is for you. It could be church, it could be the 12
Hmm.
steps, it could be, like some people like the gym, that's their holy place, right? Like
Hmm.
Pilates or the gym or working out,
Hmm.
right? And it's an approach that I think we should be teaching more of, especially at the kids
Hmm.
level, right? Like I
Hmm.
think it's gone away by the wayside where,
Yeah.
and I think it would have helped guys like you and I, younger that were probably picked on and bullied if we had a certain outlet. So like me, it was football or baseball, right? But not everybody likes to play sports, right? They don't want, but um how were let me ask you this, right? Growing up, your parents,
Hmm.
how did they support you when they saw you struggling through this and help shape you to be the man that you are today?
Yeah. I read so much about trauma, about mental health. My dissertation was on mental health. I'm doing a graduate certificate in trauma and
Excuse me.
spiritual care now. I am so lucky to have amazing parents. I wouldn't say they're perfect, but I think there's pretty as close as you can get to when it comes to perfect. Everyone's like, oh my gosh, your parents are so perfect to be supportive, loving, caring, there for me, open when I was struggling and when I am struggling, they're there for me. So I think that is really a privilege I've had because you don't get to choose your parents and you don't get to choose how they show up. Over time, you can set boundaries or ask for what you want and need. But for me, that really gave me a leg up and allowed me, when I was diagnosed with different mental health conditions or when I went through different traumas, to say, hey, here's what I'd like for you and what would be helpful.
Right. And that's key, right? When you have that kind of support to
Hmm.
help you along that journey. I mean, you're still going through it, but knowing that you have,
Hmm.
like you said, in your own words, like near perfect parents, right? That help
Yeah.
support you. What would your suggestion be? Like, I think you said one thing that earlier too that makes sense is community, right?
Hmm.
Who you surround yourself with.
Hmm.
If someone's going through a struggle right now, Dr. Elliott, what would you suggest? Like, well, how would they go about finding that community of like-minded people to help them? Like for me, we said my instance is AA, right? Like I know
Yeah.
where to go, but there's people listening and to go, well, I don't know where to go for this. Like, well, how do I do this?
I'm a fan of a buffet, having a combination, saying there might be more. It might be, like you said, AA. It might be your church or mosque. It might be someone at your gym. It might be a friend, someone that you went to school with. Going through and saying, who's been helpful when I've been struggling before, whether it was through job loss before,
Right.
whether it's through a divorce before, who's been helpful before? Let me add some of them. Let me take a lot of that. Okay, they're going to be that person I rely on a lot. And like a buffet, there might be things you don't want there and be like, I'm not going to touch that. And you might have
Right.
to go through and say, here's some people when I'm struggling, I'm actually going to have to distance myself from them as well. And I think that's something we forget about when we're
Right.
struggling, that there's actually some people who aren't helpful and we may have to set a boundary with them as well. But I'd look at the past. That's something sometimes people forget and say, who's been helpful before and can I call
Right.
upon them?
Right.
And
And
that
I
would be
think,
my first step.
right. And I think that's hard for some people in the beginning is to understand that, like I've shared on other podcasts or other guests, right? No is a complete sentence, right? Like if
Mhm.
it's uncomfortable for you, you can say, no, I'm not going to do that, but thank you for the invite or
Mhm.
whatever, right? And I love how my mentors and my sponsor always said, look, meetings aren't perfect, right? People are going to be people. People are going to fail you, right? Not on purpose, but some people they're just going to do or say the wrong thing at the wrong
Mhm.
time. But he goes, but what meetings are for, Max, is you go to see what to do and what not to do. And when you
Mhm.
see a lot of what not to do, it either means you surround yourself with the people that are doing what you want to do, or you find another meeting, right?
Mhm.
Right. And I think that's the same for life, right? If like you and I would get along great if we were out having fun, whatever, right? But we might look around and say, I might go, Dr. Elliott, I don't know if we want to go over there because they look a little crazy over there, like they're having too good of a time with their right drink, whatever the case may be,
Yeah.
right? And like you, I have found, my wife, like I don't mind being, I work from home and I love it, but like I don't need to go out and have a lot of fun, right? I do
Mhm.
need to have date night with my wife once in a while and go do something fun. But I got my grandkids downstairs, like, and I mean, there's always something going on, or my kids are calling me, and we're part of a blended family, and it's. I think what I want my audience to get from you is to, right, use that buffet, that smorgasbord.
Mhm.
Don't knock it until you try it, right?
Mhm.
See what works for you, right? And then see what doesn't, because you don't always have to go back and get that again. You could skip
Yeah.
that part, right? And then at the same time, I think what you would agree is, like, if you really need help, go seek professional help,
Oh, yeah.
right? Go get a professional's opinion. And if you have to get a second opinion, right? Because we were talking about this earlier, you and I, and the world, there's a lot of anxiety
Mhm.
and depression going on in the world. And of course, drug use, and right. Cause that's some
Mhm.
people, that was my go-to when I didn't understand what I was going through, because I didn't have to feel right. So like you, that was if I
Yeah.
don't have to feel, I found the magic potion until it
Mhm.
stopped working. Right. And then, but like now I'm here with Dr. Elliott, everybody, and we're talking about not only his experience, but if you're listening, I'm sure there's like I'm relating to his journey and how he overcame his anxiety, his OCD, and now lives a fulfilling life with his partner, and now teaching others, right? Well, in a couple arenas, how to manage that stuff. And
Mhm.
now you're in the tech world helping tech
Yeah.
people find their dream job,
Yeah.
right? So how did that happen? That part of your life, like what made you? Because you're a doctor in education.
Mhm.
How did you become a coach
Yeah.
in tech? Let's say.
100% by accident. It started on Fiverr. So, for if you're not familiar, it's this online marketplace where you charge $5 for tasks. You can use it for a logo or to record your voicemail. My idea, at the same time that I was going through these mental health things, sophomore year of college, I went on Fiverr and said, I'm going to charge $5 to review resumes, to write LinkedIn profile summaries. So I put it on there and it ended up doing really well. And my dad's advice, he doesn't remember this, but my mom remembers it, is every time you have a wait list, Kyle, double your prices, 5 to 10, 10 to 20. Back then, Craigslist services were really
Yeah.
popular. So I got clients there, got clients from classmates. I went to school in San Francisco at San Francisco State. So a lot of my clients and classmates were getting jobs at Facebook at the time, Twitter, Google, LinkedIn. So I developed this accidental niche in reviewing resumes and writing resumes for tech and became this tech resume writer. Fast forward 6 or 7 years, and I left my full-time job to do this full time. And it's been 6 or 7 years now. And now I really focus on career coaching for tech executives.
You're talking like the big, like Google
Yes. Yeah.
and Apple and stuff like that, right? Where they
It's
really
amazing
need.
to look at. Yeah, it's been 12 years now since I launched on Fiverr, and it went from these $5, here's a side hustle, to now working with some of the biggest executives. And it's been amazing to see that journey.
See that, everybody, right? He didn't let his challenges stop him. And this is why I have guests like yourself on here, right? Because now you share, like I said, you're sharing a message of hope
Mhm.
where, right? Because I always talk about this on the podcast, right? With whatever this podcast was going to be all about addiction and addiction recovery, right? But I always say God had another plan. And
Mhm.
like I have Dr. Kyle on here today sharing his story, right? Of overcoming his anxiety and OCD. So now he's this, career coach for big tech. And he probably would have never thought he was going to do this when he was a young kid, right? So
Oh no.
see, and that's a story of success, right? Like you just shared how it started out like $5-10 for this or that. And now, right. I mean, you don't have to tell us what you make now, but I'm sure you're doing very well for yourself because you've been doing it for 12 years.
Mhm.
That's some longevity, right?
Yeah.
Because there's a
And it,
lot of people that can't keep a job like me in the beginning for more than a year. Then it was on to the next one, if you know what I mean. So,
yeah. And having that hope, like you said, with my mental health and my hope with this business that things will work out. I just shared recently on, I think, LinkedIn somewhere that when it comes to the job search, when it comes to people's careers, whatever it is, I find that hope is usually the biggest thing that gets in people's way and can be the best ingredient to get you to where you want to be and to the next step.
absolutely, right. I think you hit that nail on the head, as they say, because if I didn't have hope, I wouldn't be sitting here with you, right? Because there
Mhm,
was days I was down and out and didn't feel like, but
mhm,
there was that little glimmer of hope that
mhm,
people before me planted that seed and said, if you just don't quit, Max, it's
mhm,
going to get better, right? Because there's days I just wanted to crawl, or be the the ostrich who stuck my head in the ground and just, okay, when I pop it out, everything better be hunky dory and cool.
yeah.
But you and I know that doesn't work, right?
Mhm,
So let me ask you this. So when times are getting tough today, right? Like, cause we all go through struggles still. I mean,
yeah.
how do you handle or manage life today when things are not going right? Like you just said, the pandemic. You
Yeah.
heard her. You heard him, everybody, right? He handled the pandemic by going back to school and getting his doctorate. Not all of us are going to do that, but
Yeah.
give my audience a little bit of insight on how you manage today, like when things are, because I know you wake up some days. I know I have,
Yeah.
and it's already starting because our heads are way awake before we are.
Mhm. I think it's having similar buffet. I use the buffet in a lot of things of what will give you hope. For me, it's learning. So it might be that it's other people. So saying, okay, can I tap into my parents or my partner, my friends that might give me hope? I love words of affirmation. So is it looking at testimonials from past clients or a nice email people have sent? So saying for you, okay, what are some things that give me hope? I'm a big list person. That's the buffet. And like, could you even have a list and say, when I'm not feeling hopeful, here's a list I can return to of items that will give me hope, that will give me
Right.
inspiration, that will give me purpose and meaning during those more difficult times.
I love it, but I hope my wife is going to cook a big dinner because you keep mentioning the word buffet and I'm getting really hungry. So you gave me
Love
hope
it.
for, you know what I mean? But I love that, right? It's true. It's like a buffet. Like it doesn't have to be a one thing every time,
Mhm,
right? And I think it helps us as human beings to have that buffet
mhm,
of, um, let's say coping skills in one area or whatever. If we have more than one, our chances of being resilient, which this podcast is all about too, increases, right? Is our resilience goes up. And, Dr. Elliott is shaking his head, right? Like he knows because he's been through it. And now he's helping other people, through his advocacy for mental health. And I'm sure you run this into your clients
mhm,
with big tech, right? Because that's a field that's is so in demand now. Like it's crazy where we've come just in this,
mhm,
let's say the last 5 to 10 years,
mhm.
right? And I'm sure you've come across clients who you're like, I can help this guy. I know what he's going through. And you know what I mean? How has that been for you working with these clients? And you recognize, like, let's say, I'm just gonna say it like I recognize myself in this guy. How can
Oh,
I help
yeah.
him?
It's so rewarding and fulfilling because oftentimes people come to me and on the surface, it's just, oh, we need to work on my resume or my LinkedIn profile or interviewing. But underneath, there's so much more powerful, meaningful stuff we can work on: confidence, imposter syndrome, finding purpose in their life, having an impact in the world, those things that really can make a difference, which are really exciting.
Right? That imposter syndrome it's a real thing. I
Hmm.
know as as much as I've spoken like at say an AA meeting, right, where I'm the main speaker.
Hmm.
I like 5 minutes before I'm like, I want to run, right? Because I don't deserve to be here.
Hmm.
Why would they want to listen to me? The stuff that goes to
Yeah.
your brain, and you're like, okay, Max, take a breath. But So you're kind of, not kind of, you are in a sense, kind of like a counselor therapist when you're working with clients, when you recognize that stuff and you know, hey, here's how I can help you so it's better for you. And then I'm sure they're just like, oh, I didn't even notice that, Dr. Thank you, Dr. Elliott, for helping me with that.
Yeah, I always make it clear I'm not a mental health therapist. I'm not a medical doctor. But yeah, so often people say this feels like therapy. It feels like counseling. It feels a little bit like a cheerleader. It feels a little bit like coaching. Feels like a little bit of a lot. And oftentimes, people in our society, mental health is so stigmatized. We don't have a space to discuss these things
Yes.
with anyone. So it's the one space where they're able to discuss it. And since we spend 40, 50, 60 hours a week, sometimes more if you're a tech executive at work, so much of it comes up when I work with people.
Absolutely. And you're right, right? Like, I mean, I'm a substance abuse counselor, but I'm not a therapist. But the things that you and I have gone through can actually benefit the clients we work with.
Mhm,
Because
mhm,
when we can relate on that level,
mhm,
they understand, like, oh, Dr. Elliott gets me. Like, so I'm
mhm,
going to be, and then it causes them, I think, to be more open and honest with you, what they
mhm,
really want, what they want to do. You know, let's say what their
mhm.
salary they're looking for, where they want to work at. And then that gives you an idea of, okay, this is what we
Yeah.
got to do. Right. So, man, this has been, I knew it was going to be, anytime I see a doctor wanting to be on my podcast, I get excited. And I love it, right? Because I love picking your brains and I love hearing your stories. Because what I have found is not just that, but people who have gone through, right, challenges and done stuff like go back and get their education as, you know, PhD or medical doctor or whatever. And I've had past guests or guests who run, you know, multi-million-dollar companies, you know, when they share their story of when they were younger and the stuff like we've gone
Mhm.
through, anxiety, and they didn't think they were worthy of it. You have helped my audience, I know, a ton, right? Because that's the point, is I wanted us to share that hope and I wanted them to hear it from you and what you've went through. So I'm going to ask you some of the questions I love to ask, right? So fearless, as you see, is part of the title of my book. What does fearless mean to you, Dr. Elliott, and how does that show up in your life on a daily basis?
Oh, I love that question. For me, it means living life without a mask and saying, you know what, who, as you said earlier, kind of when you look back, when look in the mirror, you see your same self back and say, that's me. For
Mhm.
me, it's going out there and saying, okay, the person I am at home, when I'm by myself, when I'm with those people I trust and love, I'm the same person there as I am out in society. Yes, there might be times I have to mask for my safety or protection, but as often as possible, I'm the same person regardless of the environment or the surroundings.
Right. And I think that's when you realize, like, for me, I have arrived, right? I don't have to put on a
Mhm,
mask. Like, I
mhm,
am the same, you know, father, grandfather, brother, uncle who
mhm.
works from home. Same guy if he's here with us, you know what I
Yeah.
mean? And that's, to me, I think that is so satisfying to know that, right? And even though we don't have to be perfect at it, we know when we wake up who we are,
Mhm.
right? And that's half the battle, I think, right? And then, you know,
Oh, yeah.
as we grow, because I'm big into personal development, right? Becoming an entrepreneur myself, right? Everyone that I told I was going to be an entrepreneur who was already an entrepreneur would always say, hey, Max, right? It's not for the faint of heart, but if you don't quit, you're gonna learn a lot about yourself. You're gonna learn about people, and you will be successful, but you're going to fail a lot, but just don't give up. And I'm like, and it's been one of the, you know, besides my recovery and I'm being a father and a husband, the best journey I've ever been on is being an entrepreneur. Cause,
Yeah.
you know, like, cause there would have been days I would have, like, I've had rough days. Oh, I got to interview Dr. Elliott. Let me see what excuse I can come up with to tell him, can we reschedule? You know what I mean? But I don't do that now because it's, right? I love doing this and I love meeting people like yourself and having you share your story with my audience. So that moves us on to the next question, happiness. And if you could see, right, put shoulder
Yep.
there. I put a Y in it for a reason. But what does happiness mean to you? And how does that show up in your life today?
I think happiness is two pieces. One, it's saying, okay, what is my purpose? Identifying that and then fulfilling that. And for me, that purpose is making an impact in the world, making a difference, positive difference, and then working to fulfill that, often through my work, or through doing these podcast engagements where I can share my story, where I can hopefully give other people some hope, that they can achieve recovery, that they can be able to, if they want to, share their own story and to continue to have that ripple effect and that positive impact.
Right. And I appreciate that, right? Because it's a lot like addiction. If we can share our stories with others,
Mm-hmm.
right, then it gives that person looking back at us going, I'm not alone. Right.
Mm-hmm.
And it all goes back. That's where that hope starts to grow, because then
Yep.
they know I am not alone. I can do this.
Yeah.
Right. I just have to find the right people to help me. I need to, do some work, and
Yeah.
which, that's what I tell my audience, right? Whatever you're going through is just trust the process.
Yeah.
Right. And don't quit on yourself, because when you get to the other side, you're going to find how much stronger you become in that journey. And you're going to be lucky, like me, to meet, gentlemen like Dr. Elliott and have these awesome conversations on my podcast, and whatever you choose to do. Right. It may not be a podcast, but my thing is, like, and I teach it to my kids, especially my grandkids, right? Is don't ever quit on yourself, and don't let anybody tell you can't do something.
Mm-hmm.
Right. Because I had enough of that when I was growing up, where I
Mm-hmm.
wasn't, you know what I mean? And I've learned
Mm-hmm.
in my journey in recovery and as an entrepreneur and self-development, personal development, is that I'm never going to let anybody tell me that I can't do anything,
Yeah.
because I'm going to go, watch me. Right. And
Love
like
it.
and I have, matter of fact, I have 166, almost 166 episodes to prove that whatever you put your mind to, you could do it. Right. Because
Yeah.
this is a labor of love for me. I love doing this, and I just love hearing your story, Dr. Elliott, because you inspired me, and I know you inspire my audience. Right. So you heard Dr. Elliott, though, right? Like, if you need help, we're not doctors, but go find the help.
Mm-hmm.
Know that there's always hope, and just look at it as a buffet. Right. You're going to have all these choices. Right. And if you do it the right way, you're going to find that there's going to be people along the way that are going to help you make
Mm-hmm.
those choices, and you will never, ever have to do this alone. So that leads me. So if people want to find you, Dr. Elliott, right, and they want to ask questions, get your help, or I even got some techie people on here looking to, boost their resume and use you as a business coach, how can they find you?
Yeah, a few spots. My website, caffeinatedkyle.com, LinkedIn, Kyle Elliott with 2 L's or 2 T's, and Instagram, caffeinated Kyle.
Caffeinated Kyle. I love it. You must love your coffee too, right?
Oh, yes, especially Starbucks.
That's awesome. Like, yeah, Starbucks. That's like a staple in my house, right? In the morning.
Here too.
I love it, Dr. Elliott. This has been such an amazing, amazing time, but you're not quite off the hook just yet, right? I have one last question that I love asking my guests, and it goes like this. So what, Dr. Elliott, is the one piece of advice you could give my audience to help them grow as human beings and become better people?
I would latch onto that hope piece and realize that hope is contagious. And when you find those pieces of hope, how can you latch onto that? Recognizing it's contagious. Is it someone that gives you a lot of hope? Is it some sort of podcast? And then you're like, oh, this gives me hope. Let me keep listening more. Look for those pieces of hope that are contagious. And if you notice other areas that are maybe not very hopeful, that can be contagious. So try and push those away and latch onto those pieces of hope that are contagious.
There you go. You heard it, everybody. Because hope can be contagious, right?
Mm-hmm.
I know. Dr. Elliott knows. We all been through it. So never give up hope. And like he said, you could reach out to him anytime. Well, this has been fun, Dr. Elliott. Thank you for taking the time out of your busy schedule to be with me. This has been an amazing time. So like everybody knows what I'm going to say, right? So if Dr. Elliott made you think, if he taught you something, if he made you smile, made you laugh, or my famous, if he made you go, I like that, please go to iTunes and leave a 5-star review so more people can find the podcast. So again, good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, wherever you are in this world. It's Mac from the Fearless Happiness Podcast. Until next time.
Are you tired of being weighed down by life's traumas and struggles? Join the Fearless Happiness lifestyle and let us guide you toward a brighter future. Explore our past podcast episodes and get a copy of the Fearless Happiness book to ignite your inner strength. If you or someone you love is battling addiction or facing challenges related to unresolved trauma, know that we are here for you. Visit maxnijst.org, maxnijst.org, and take the first steps toward finding your fearless happiness. Thank you for listening. This has been a production of Fearless Happiness.